hang out with Coach Kerry, and I'm excited about today's episode. We're going to be talking about business systems. Business Systems 101. Are you an entrepreneur that struggles sometimes with knowing, what to be working on at any given time? Well, we've talked about that a lot in the time management episodes that were earlier on. However, having systems in place is one of the pieces that also helps your productivity and your time management, because sometimes you keep reinventing the wheel over and over again. You keep doing the same thing over and over again, but each time you've got to stop and think about what you're doing. So that's why systems are really critical to any business, even if you are a solopreneur working on your own. So today I have I have an Academy member on with me as my panelist today, Kathy Scott. Kathy, why don't you introduce yourself to the viewers and tell them about you and how they can find you online?
Hi, Kerry. Thanks for having me on again today. It's a great day for an online hangout. My name is Kathy Scott, and I have a fabulous little business called Niche Travel. And one of the things that I specialize in is women's tours all over the world. And they're wonderful 4-star boutique tours that inspire women to travel. And so it's a lot of fun. And women can find me on nichetravel.ca or nichewomenstours.ca.
Great, thanks, Kathy. So 2 places they can find you online. And if you are a woman in business and you love to travel, you have a passion for travel, check out Kathy's website and see all the amazing small group destinations groups tours that she does. So today, back to business systems. And everything in your business can be systemized. Every single thing. Marketing, sales, customer service, how you outsource, how you hire a contractor, if you have a virtual assistant, how you go about doing that, how you order products for your computer, your toner, your paper, all of that. Because every time you have to stop and think, oh, how do I do that again? Or what's the process for that? It takes time. And for a lot of you, I know you have creative brains. Your mind is all different directions. And so having a system in place will help you focus, and you will end up being much more efficient and much more productive and do things the right way all the time. Because one of the things is the customer experience of you needs to be consistent every single time. So you want to be continually asking yourself, what system could be in place so this would be consistent for the customer experience. So in upcoming episodes, we'll be doing Systems 201, and we'll be getting into more detail on specific areas, maybe brainstorming with some of the panelists, some issues that they have, whether it has to do with finance and administration, for an example. I know in my 16 years as a business coach, working with a lot of entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, is that they tend to avoid dealing with their finances. So that's one area that you can put some systems in place, some checklists, some flow charts in place that makes that much easier for you, and maybe isn't that big elephant that you may be avoiding. So every single thing in your business can be systemized. So Kathy, right out of the gate, I'm going to ask you to ask me a question today, and then I'll obviously use that as an opportunity to provide you some coaching and some coaching for the people who are watching the episode today.
Great. Well, I think the first thing that comes up for me, Kerry, is what are the very basic and essential systems to start? Where you've got to start from, you haven't got any systems in place, where would I start?
Great question. And so I'm going to start with not necessarily what systems, but how to create that first, and then we'll get into how to decide which ones are the first ones. So the first thing I would want all of you to do is to create an organizational chart. Now, don't roll your eyes at that. You might say, well, I don't need an organizational chart. There's just me. That's the point. So a typical organizational chart will have the shareholders in the company at the very top. So if that's you, you're there. Then below that, you are the CEO, probably, of your organization. And then below that, you're going to draw a line, and you're going to draw it out either side, and you're going to have a couple of boxes down below there. And typically what they happen to be is VP of Marketing, VP of Sales, VP of Operations, that's actually the delivering of the business that you do, and VP of Finance and Administration. That's pretty consistent. Because underneath finance and administration, you could put HR, human resources. That's any hiring of any contractors or any outsourcing work that you do. And that even includes, by the way, if you use Odesk or Elance or Fiverr or any of those companies, online options for you in terms of hiring people to do certain things. So those could be. So you could, if you do that a lot, you could have another box off to the side that says HR. And then what you want to do is you want to stop and think, what are kind of the big rocks, the big jobs that that fall underneath that? So when it comes to marketing, what might be the big big rocks underneath that? Now, one key thing here is we're talking about job function. We're not talking about who's doing it, because chances are for most of you, you're the one doing most of those jobs, and that's okay. Your name would go in those afterwards. You may, at this point, you might have a business partner, or you might have somebody else who does certain things for you. For example, your IT. So under finance and administration, under the administration section, you may have a block that says IT. So you may have your computer person, who is the person that you call when you have those kinds of issues. So that is somebody that you might already have in that position. So their name would go in there. Now, they don't have to be an employee, remember. They can be a contractor, because today's entrepreneur chooses, and a lot of times, not to have employees and the responsibility of an employee, but to have a contractor. And it's really important that you have procedures and systems in place regarding hiring those people. So first step is creating a functional organizational chart. That's the most important thing, and breaking it down. You don't have to get into the minutia of it, because again, it's you and you know pretty much a lot of the things, but I do want you to create that. And then step number 2 is I want you to actually write position descriptions for each of those, as if you're hiring. Now, they don't have to be formally written. We're not actually going to be out hiring, putting ads in the paper for any of those. But what's that person's responsibility, and who do they report to? And again, if it's you, that's okay. And it's okay if at some point you never want to have other people's names in that organizational chart. What it does, it helps you set aside your time in your time budget that we talked about in an earlier episode. So if you're doing administration work, you know specifically what you're doing within that time. So again, it helps you organize your time management and your productivity. So the very first 2 things you do, step number 1 is you create an organizational chart, and step number 2 is you create your position descriptions. Then, to answer your question, Kathy, is which systems are really important for me to do first? That's actually quite individual. And the question I want to ask you, and Kathy, maybe you might even think of this and share it with the listeners today, because it may be one for them, is what are the things that you repeat over and over and over again? However, every time you go to do it, you have to stop and ask yourself, okay, what's the process again for this? Because that is a colossal waste of time to have to stop and ask yourself that question, because what you're doing is you're actually leaving money on the table, because you could be doing much more productive things, more income generating things. So the first question or criteria in terms of which ones to decide would be, which are the ones that you're doing over and over again, yet you also have to stop and ask yourself, how do I go about doing that every single time? And the second one is you want to ask yourself, which systems will support me in creating predictable income? Now, when it comes to a small business, your number 1 priority in your business is to build predictable income. That's your most important thing. So creating a system for something that you might only use 3 or 4 times a year, creating a system for something that right now isn't as important for you. In other words, you're doing all the positions in your organizational chart, and you have no plan right now to outsource any of that, then I would say that would not be a priority right now. But if you have something that you do every single week or every couple of weeks, like producing a newsletter, for example, and every time you do that, you have to stop and say, okay, well, how do I put this? What's the flow in it? Where do I find those links? All of that, and you're having to think through that. Then that's an area that you would want to systemize right out of the gate. And things where you think, okay, this is how I'm going to create predictable income. So if it comes to a networking or a marketing strategy that's going to create predictable income for you, then that's one of the systems you want to put in place right out of the gate. So Kathy, back at you, and I want to ask you maybe if you have a specific question around that with relating to your business that the listeners might find very helpful in thinking of their own.
I don't know about a question so much, but an observation when you were talking about the thing that you do the most. And I think for me it is emails, actually, which might sound odd to some people, but I have standard responses, and I type them out every time. So really what I should do is systemize that. And so that was a really big aha moment for me.
Great, excellent, great observation, and that's the value of coaching, of course, is because often we pose the question, give a little bit of information, and then the answer is right there. So Kathy, what I would recommend you do is you create drafts or templates for all of those standard responses, so that you're not having to reinvent the wheel every single time. So that's a perfect example. And really what that relates to is a marketing strategy, because I'm assuming these inquiries are coming in for people that are interested in your tours or your tour operators who are responding back to you. So if you can eliminate the amount of time you're spending typing out and retyping that email every single time, that's going to help you move that faster. And if that in the end starts creating that predictable income for you because you get responses back faster from people, well, then that's a key thing to be systemizing right out of the gate. So thanks for that, Kathy. That's a really good point. So what I want to now do is move to is sort of what's the steps. So Kathy, think of yours, your example, for an example, in terms of templates, or there may even be something else that maybe triggers for you through this process. So the first question is you want to ask yourself is, what's the task? That's step number one. What's the task? And identify which, what that task is. And the second one is pick one piece within that task, if it is, or that task itself. So you want to pick the one that's the key one, and then you want to ask who's doing that. Well, if it's you, that's okay. So you know that you're the one who does it. Then what you want to do is you want to document the ideal process. So stop for a moment and think, okay, what's the ideal process in this? Now, you may be thinking, I'm too busy to actually put these systems in place. And I'm going to challenge you as your coach to say to you is that the cost for you of not putting these systems in place is what's making you so busy. So the systems will actually give you the time to be able to step back and put these things in place. This is the working on your business, not just in your business. So stop chasing the money sometimes in order to start putting the systems in place, so then you don't have to chase so hard. So what you're going to do is you're going to document the ideal. So you're going to put that down so you've got it. Then what you want to do is you actually want to flow chart the actual. So next time you do it, have just a piece of paper beside you and write down what you're actually doing. And then what you want to do is compare the two together and see where the differences are. Did you capture everything that you were supposed to capture? Maybe you didn't. So then you want to take a moment and brainstorm a bit, what is the best and the simplest process? Because now that you've actually documented and you can look at it, you might actually find that what you're doing is much more complicated than it needs to be. So what is this simplest process? It may be that you have a page that has links in it. Let's say there's something that you always do. Let's say it relates to writing the newsletter. And there are always a bunch of links that you want to put in, maybe to other websites or other things. And every time you're going to have to type that in versus cutting and pasting them. So that's an example. So what you're going to do is look for the simplest way, because it's going to trigger things for you that it's going to make it simple. Now, if you do have an outsourced person or an employee, for an example, this is a really good opportunity to brainstorm with them. Ask them what would make it simpler, because they have a different perspective on it. They may come up with something that you might not. Then what you're going to do is you're going to flow chart the new process. So you've documented the ideal, you've actually done it and flow charted it, you've compared them, you've brainstormed on what the differences are and what maybe how you could add to it or take away from it to make it simple and easy to follow. And now what you're going to do is you're actually going to flow chart this new one as well. And then what you're going to do is going to write the text that goes with it. because sometimes you might flowchart something and it isn't really clear. There may be a bit of explanation. And this is especially important for those things on your organizational chart that are what I call at the bottom of the organizational chart. If you were to put a dollar value to the activities at the lower end of your organizational chart, there would just be $1. Kind of like for you, Kathy, if people are looking for a restaurant somewhere and it's got a single dollar versus a $5 signs. They know the $5 sign one is going to be an expensive meal and the single dollar is going to be the less expensive one. So exactly the same thing in your organizational chart. So those are the single dollar signs you're going to put on the bottom one, and those are the ones that you're actually going to delegate or outsource first, to have you spend time on the higher level items that are up further in the organizational chart. Business development, creating new relationships with potential clients, working on your business, those types of things. So it's important that you record all of these items, because that becomes then your training of those people. So I don't know how many times I've heard people say, the last thing I want to do is hire somebody again. I hired somebody to do this and all it was a mess and I had to go in and clean it up afterwards. Well, my response to that is usually a question that is, tell me a little bit about the training program and the protocols that you have in place for a person to do that work. Well, they end up fessing up that of course they didn't, because they hired the person who said they were something, then they gave them the work to do, but there were no expectations laid out. So at this time, while you're doing it, you know how you like it done. This is the time to record how it is. So you've written the text, you've got it all in place. It's going to now go into your operations manual, procedures manual. There it is, it's done for you. And then you're going to go back and pick the next one that you want to do. You're going to walk through that same process and the next one and walk it through. Kathy, any questions about that or observations that you might have about what I just went through in terms of, Systems 101, how to walk through creating them?
I don't think I have any questions at this point. I certainly have some work to do. That's an observation. But it's actually given me a good framework for, it's something I have struggled with, honestly, is putting the systems in place. And daily I think to myself, oh, if I had a checklist for this, it would be so much better. But I think you breaking it down and saying, okay, start with this and going through this process has been very helpful. So thank you.
Great. Good. And, checklists are a system. So I would encourage you that next time you go to do whatever that is, or that thought comes into your mind, oh, I wish I had a system for this, is, I have sometimes clients just get a clipboard that's on their desk. And the reason I have them do a clipboard, because then it distinguishes it from all the other stuff that may be on your desk. And the clipboard with the blank paper on it is where you're actually going to document what you're doing. And that's the first place to start. If you do have an employee or someone who's working with you, sometimes it's easier to have them record it while you're doing it. Because you may be so busy in the flow of it that you don't want to stop. It may have to do with scripts, for an example, how you do certain things around making a call, what you say on that call, have someone listen to it, or record it and then transcribe it. Every single time you put a system like that in place, it's going to improve your efficiency. It's going to improve your consistency in terms of the work you get done, and the congruency within which the world out there observes you. Because how you do anything, how you do anything is assumed to be how you do everything. So every single interaction, even the way you answer the phone, is a system. The way you respond to people is a system. The way you set up certain events is a system. So every single time you have a checklist that puts it in place, it's taking it out of your brain, which, as you know, from episodes 2 until 7, we talked a lot about time management and productivity. And this is what happens is when you've got it all in your brain and you're trying to remember it in your brain, you're not using your brain for higher level thinking. And we want to use your brain. We all should want to use our brain for higher level creative thinking, problem solving, big picture growth. and not have to be thinking about, okay, what was that step I had to do with this every single time we have to do it over and over and over again. So I would encourage you to think about the areas of your business. So think about, what areas are there in marketing right now that I could put a system in place that would make it much more efficient for me? What's the area in sales? Each and every one of you, if you have customers or clients, you are in sales. How you respond to people if they make an inquiry. How much time you spend on the phone with them to see if they're an ideal client or customer for you. What's the script you go through? What's the process? What do you say at the very end to see whether they're interested in working with you or if they're ready to make the purchase? Then how do you handle each of the customer interactions you have? From the initial inquiry to when they're actually doing business with you to afterwards. How do you interact with your past clients? Because it's easier to get more business or referrals from a past client than it is to look for a new one. So rather than scrambling for a new one, stop and ask yourself, what system could I put in place with respect to my customer service, every interaction I have with my customer, how I handle things. How do you handle things when things go wrong? That's a system, because you know how you handle it. How do you deal with referrals? That's a system. What's your system in place? Versus having to stop and say, okay, what should I do for this person because they sent me this referral? You have a policy around that, and then a procedure, a system with what you do with that. Then how do you deal with your human resources? So whether that's hiring a new person for your business, what's the interview process you go through? If you're outsourcing, what's the process you go through? You know, I learned very early on when I started outsourcing that I knew what my expectations were, and I knew what I wanted out of this particular contract. And often I would get it back and it wasn't what I wanted it to be. And I realized it was because I wasn't clear in outlining my expectations. And the clearer I became with my expectations and was able to articulate those, and even a checklist, did I talk about the size? So let's say I'm having someone do some graphic work for me. Is the size? All of these questions. The more I had that in place, the less confusion there was and the less back and forth and disappointments and time delays. So, you know, think about that. Think about the administration. How do you invoice? How do you bill people for work? How do you personally pay your bills? Is there a certain time of month that you do those? If you have credit cards, how do you handle the different due dates that are in them? Those are all systems that you want to put in place. How do you deal with your remissions of taxes? What do you do with your receipts? What's your system for dealing with your receipts? I remember early on in a previous career, I was a successful real estate agent, and my mother's, her background was she was a bookkeeper. So one time we were talking about all of my receipts and whatnot, and kind of asked her what she did for her business, because they were in business, and because I didn't really have a system, I had kind of had the typical shoebox. And she said to me, well, let's talk a little bit about what you need. And I found, because I was so busy and I was so fast-paced, that I wasn't separating out my receipts, and then it became this big elephant because it was this huge job that had to be done. So what she even suggested I do, which was so simple, is I create 5 or 6 different envelopes that had headings on them. So automobile, office expenses, meals, travel, whatever had to be whatever would be your categories, they're going to be specific for you. So when I emptied out my wallet with all of these receipts, I would sit in front of these 5 envelopes and just stuff them in there. And that took no time to do that. So then it was so much easier when I went to do my taxes. I could just take out those receipts, do a total, and put it on the front. In fact, she even encouraged me to set a couple of times a year when I would go through the contents of it and do a total of what I'd done at that point and staple those ones together. So I knew the ones stapled together were part of that total, and the ones that were in there that weren't part of that total. Now, I don't know about you, but that was such a simple system, yet I avoided it, or I'd not avoided, I didn't have a system in place for years that cost me stress. I know for a lot of clients I talk to, they avoid anything with around money. So wouldn't that make it simpler? And if you're sending all of that box of receipts out to a bookkeeper, what's it costing you financially for the fact that you're not taking that little step that you could be doing on your own? And the other thing too is that if you're avoiding looking at what your receipts are, this is going to make you have a look at them and make sure you're watching your expenses. So as you can see, every single thing in your business can be systemized, all the way from the start right through to the very end. And at the bottom line is the more systems you put in place, the more time and productivity and efficiency you'll have, which at the end of the day always equals, what is it? More money. That's absolutely what it is. So say yes if these tips today were of value for you in Business Systems 101.
Yes, for me.
Okay, good, good. And I would love to have you interact with me. For those of you who are watching this recorded, many different ways you can ask me questions, so please do it. You can go to Google Hangouts, of course, actually go to Google Plus to hang out with Coach Kerry, and you can pose your questions there, because the replay of this video will be there. And also at hangoutcoachkerry.com. Please tell me what other questions you have so I can make sure that these episodes are of value to you. So Kathy, one last opportunity for a clarification or a question before we sign off for today.
I don't think I have any questions, Kerry. It was a very, a fabulous session. Thank you. And I've got some homework to do, so that's my observation.
Great. Good, good. So again, watch for Business Systems 201. We're going to get into a little bit more detail. What are some specifics within those categories, especially the key ones that I know most of you are keen on probably, which are marketing, sales, customer service, and maybe finance and administration. So anyway, I look forward to providing you with great content and connecting with you on future episodes. So for that, the end of today, make sure 9 a.m. Pacific time you can watch live on Hangouts on Air or hangoutwithcoachkerry.com, or you can watch all previous episodes at hangoutwithcoachkerry.com. And Kerry is spelled Kerry. Have an awesome week, and I look forward to talking with you soon. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.